Welcome to this week's episode of Leaders on a Mission, where I'm joined by inspiring leaders driven by the impact of creating a healthy and sustainable world. And in today's episode, I'm joined by Kris Wadrop, who's running the UK's Centre of Process Innovation, Commercial Operations. But Kris, thanks for coming on to the show today to talk about your mission and your mission for the future of our planet, as it were. So thanks for joining us.
Hey, Simon, you're welcome. Real pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So why don't we start with, tell me about the mission. Tell me about, what resonates and what you're looking to achieve and drive forward at the CPI.
So CPI is a not-for-profit tech innovation organization. What does that mean? It means we help companies scale up their technology, getting it out of either small companies, getting it out of the lab up to some kind of commercial scale, or quite often if you're a large corporate, you have your annual P&L or whatever else it is that you're actually focused on. And often they're quite inflexible. They're like super tankers that can't change direction very easily. So they engage with companies like CPI to actually do some more of their skunk works in the background to help them develop new ideas and new concepts without actually distracting the majority of their workforce. So we work at both ends of the kind of company scale or company spectrum, either doing development, lab development, or demonstration and scale up of different people's or different organizations' ideas and activities. And it crosses it crosses boundaries in terms of technology, whether it's industrial biotechnology or biotherapeutics or formulation science or packaging or electronics. And what we find is that actually, it isn't just about the widget or about a specific piece of technology, because, for example, if you're looking at food and food science and alternative proteins, there's a great example in today's market. Billions of pounds have been invested there. It isn't just about manufacturing the ingredient, which is the alternative protein, which you can produce in a fermenter, because it comes out of that fermenter and it has to be stabilized and it has to be formulated into something that actually has a shelf life that will enable it to be integrated into other recipes or whatever else it will be. So then it also needs to be packaged. And it has to be packaged in a way that when quite often people are looking for these products, they're looking for the health benefits associated with the alternative protein or whatever else it might be. But what there also is, there's a moral and ethical journey that the clients are on. Quite often the consumer's looking specifically for that. So what they're looking for is often something that's packaged in the right way as well. Because, using a package that's based on fossil fuels, it's a single-use plastic that's going straight into landfill, kind of negates the value of the alternative protein and changing the food system that you've been driving with your purchase. So a client will often want that ethical and moral journey as well, right the way through from the product that they're buying to how it's packaged and being delivered to them. And CPI can help in that entire journey. But what we also are very, very keen on, especially at the moment, is we can't do everything. We don't pretend we can do everything. But what we've done over the last 17 years of being around is built a global network of innovation organizations and innovators and small, medium enterprise customers and partners. And what we're trying to promote now with our clients is almost a one-door innovation center where we can't do everything for you. We don't pretend we can do everything for you, but we've got a friend who can. And quite often, the biggest challenge in any kind of adventure, a business-oriented adventure, is knowing who can help you. And then invariably, you have to sign an NDA with everybody. Everybody has different terms and conditions, and then everybody wants a purchase order, and everybody wants specific contracts for this, that, or the other, or licensing agreements. And what you find is the time and energy taken to do all the due diligence with all your different partners and getting that entire supply chain coverage from manufacturing ingredient to thinking about the package and the label that you're going to put on that can be 10, 20, 30 different organizations that you have to work with, which if you're a small technology company is a huge burden in terms of having time and energy to go through all that contractual stuff. And if you're a large corporate, well, your legal department's not really interested. They want to deal with your sales. So what we're trying to do now in CPI is build that network behind us. So customers just have to come and work with us, one set of contracts, one set of NDAs, and we deal with all the partnership stuff in the background. So, I liken it to, if you're doing a house project and you're going to build an extension on your house, you've got bricklayers, you've got some civil works, you've got some electricians, you've got plumbers, you've got a painter and decorator. You don't want to do 6 or 8 different contracts with all those different disciplines. What you want is one builder that's on the hook to deliver your product or your program of work.
Yeah.
So you want one contract where you know who is responsible. And then through that, if there's a problem, you know where you're going. But also it's much, much less intensive in terms of your time and energy to get what you're achieving. So that's the kind of approach we're taking to innovation now in CPI, where we're actually providing a lot of the service ourselves, but where we have gaps in what the client might need or what the market's demanding, we use our network of partners in the background to actually provide a complete service to our customers.
Absolutely. Sounds great. And maybe give us some examples of either products or companies that you've helped kind of bring product to the market, as it were.
So a great one, I think you might have actually interviewed the CEO, Alan Shaw, is Callista. Callista came to CPI about 6 years ago with a process that was going to revolutionize alternative proteins in the animal feed industry. Specifically, their first product was going into aquaculture and for farm fish. And they had a technology that was lab-based, liters in a laboratory. And their ambition was to build a plant that could produce tons of material that they would be able to not sell into the market, but if you think you're a fish farm aquaculture company, one of the large corporates like Cargill or Nutricore or these guys, they need your product to be able to test to prove that it does what you say it does, and they need a lot of it, because if you're doing a sample on one fish in a lab is quite different to being able to have a pen of a couple of thousand fish in a lake somewhere to see how it works in the natural environment. So you need to be able to produce hundreds of kilos or tons of material, which is quite difficult when you aren't at commercial scale. So Callista, through Alan's leadership, did multiple investment rounds and got the capital to actually build a demonstration facility that was capable of producing tons of material of their product that they could take into their marketplace. As I say, Callista came and they were doing a kind of beauty show of different potential partners that they could work with. And at the time, they informed me we were working in competition with somewhere in America and somewhere in Norway that were proposing to offer the same service as CPI. But through conversation and leveraging the skill sets and the people and the resources that we already had here in Redcar in the UK, Callista saw the advantages of coming and working with CPI, and we went basically from a blank sheet of paper with them to producing their first ton of material, their first ton of product through their bespoke process, having built a demonstration facility with them in 18 months, for which we were recognised in the IQME Global Awards for actually the way we structured that project. And again, it's a great example of how we use partners to deliver more for the customer. So at CPI, we have some engineering capability, so we can take the customer's designs and concepts to a certain level, but we work with other companies in the engineering ecosystem to provide more detailed services that can go on and actually build stuff for the clients. And we introduced a company called Otto Simon, who were based down in Manchester, to Callista, who worked with us to build this what became the Teesside pilot plant. I think they called it, or their market introduction facility, that's gone on to produce over 25 tons of material for their market over the last couple of years. But they now still work with Otto Simon in the facility that they're building in China.
Right. Okay.
So they continue to use our partners, no longer with CPI involved, really, but the partners that we introduced at the early stages continue to support the customer and through to the customer's commercialization journey. So to me, that's a massive, fantastic example of success where we've helped the customer achieve their objectives. The customer's gone on to commercialization, but is continuing to leverage the network we introduced them to.
Absolutely, that's great. And with that technology as well, because it's pretty unique, isn't it, right? You're taking gas, you're taking methane, essentially, and you're taking it out of the atmosphere, right? Am I right in thinking? And then you're converting it into protein, essentially,
Well,
right?
they're not taking the methane out of the atmosphere. The methane can come from a number of different sources, whether it's from anaerobic digestion or it's waste gas from other processing, or it's from it's from just a natural gas source out of a pipe.
So tell me, is everything that you're doing, like at the moment, is everything really baked in a sustainability agenda, basically? Because it's about doing more with less, as it were.
It's looking for a triple bottom line, really. It's about being a healthy planet, but also within CPI, we look at the health of the person. So you look at it from the two sides. Sometimes what we do is focused on the health of an individual. So right now, you look at some of the COVID vaccine work that CPI has been supporting the UK government with on RNA, which is evolving in nascent technology that's relatively new to the scene, but is being leveraged massively successfully in quick deployment of vaccines to address the COVID pandemic. They're not really sustainable because the focus there is all about personal health and the health of the individual. However, you look at some of the other things that we're doing with alternative foods, with the agri-tech system, looking at materials, batteries, electronics, labeling for the pharmaceutical sector. All of that is more around waste reduction, carbon emission, carbon abatement, or just more sustainable processes, less water consumption, alternative, you're looking at agri-tech, for example, biostimulants instead of using pesticides or inorganic fertilizers, where you have challenges with runoff into water courses and all this kind of thing. Using industrial biotechnology to leverage nature's natural way of growing plants, and using bacteria around. Are you familiar with the term the microbiome?
Absolutely, I am familiar with it. Yeah.
So everywhere, when you look at it, everywhere has a microbiome. We have a gut microbiome, we have a mouth microbiome. A plant has a microbiome. Yeah. So there is a natural microbial system around any plant to enable it to grow. Well, you can enhance that system by adding or concentrating certain organisms that are already naturally occurring and in the environment, but just concentrating them around the plant. And by applying that, you can grow and increase yields on the plants, increase plant health, rather than applying sort of external sources of fertilizer and other things. And there's a number of companies in the UK, well, around the world, like Exotic Technologies, have worked with CPI to develop their process and deploy material out into their marketplace. And there's also large multinationals, the likes of Corteva or Syngenta, who are also very interested in working in this space and in regular conversation, should I say, within the networks in the UK, looking for either developing their own technologies or working with SMEs that have got new concepts that they may struggle to get to market without the support of the big companies like Syngenta or Corteva.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Certainly, when I look across some of the changes in the agricultural systems at the moment, there really is a fundamental shift in the use of some of this science and technology, to be able to, even you mention it, the reduction on harmful kind of pesticides, for instance, into much more of a bio-based kind of solutions, which are healthier for the environment. Maybe they biodegrade and they give back to the soil as well. So, it's such a exciting, interesting world of innovation. But let me ask you, because a lot of those challenges come from these companies. They get the technology working in the lab, and it's always the fundamental challenge. And you see some of them with this little tiny test tube, for instance, and we did this, and it's such a challenging, arduous journey to really essentially take that and bring that to some type of scale, basically. And they used to call it the valley of death, didn't they? Really, when
they still do. They still do, and they're liking it to the technology readiness levels, the TRL levels, which is Again, this was developed by NASA back in the 60s. So NASA's accountable for a massive amount of the innovation or the practices and technologies and systems and processes that get used today. But yeah, the valley of death is basically TRL 3 through 7, which is getting out of the lab and getting it to commercialization. And just to give you, if the listeners are not readily aware or familiar with TRLs, TRL 1 is I've got an idea, and I can maybe do it once in a laboratory at a very, very small scale, quite theoretical. TRL 9 is I'm building my 5th plant, or I'm selling my 100,000th ton of whatever it is. TRL 8 is I'm selling my 1st ton, or I'm building my 1st plant. TRL 3 is where I'm taking it out of the laboratory, or I'm starting to introduce reality to it. I'm really doing my techno-economics in another level of detail. I'm using more real-world feedstocks. And 3 through 7 is where I'm getting it out of the laboratory through a piloting regime. So I'm going from milliliters through to liters, tens of liters, hundreds of liters, or kilograms, hundreds of kilograms, into tons. And TRL 6, 7, I'm able to produce material that I'm actually testing in the marketplace, where my customers are putting it through real application tests and validating that the product that we're manufacturing is of real value to them. And that's what enables you to then go and raise the significant capital that is required to go build your first commercial facility. And again, that's Callista joined us in their journey. They were probably TRL 3, 4, 4, 5, and we took them through to TRL 7 with the facilities here on Teesside.
It's really fascinating, because one of the changes I've really seen over the years in relation to this was, it used to be that every firm, a lot of firms didn't want to, build their own manufacturing capability. They were all working with lots of outsource providers and, CMOs, and it was about managing that external relationship. But I think with COVID, right, with what's happened and those supply chains being disturbed, do you see that evolving and changing really in terms of companies' strategy to actually commercialize?
Well, what we're seeing, and this has been a challenge, and it's a challenge in industrial biotechnology specifically, is the CMO world has focused very much around pharmaceutical. So you have a lot of customers and companies out there who are trying to do the right thing, trying to move their markets in the right way in terms of the new, more sustainable alternatives. There's companies like Unilever, Croda out there doing, looking at new surfactants for detergents and things, and bringing in new technologies and developing new technologies. But if you think the detergent market is hundreds of thousands or millions of tons a year. What do I say when I mean detergents? Everything from washing up liquid through to the tablet you put in your dishwasher, or the liquids or the powders that you put in your washing machines, through to some of the squirty bottles that you do for cleaning surfaces. These are all detergents that have surfactants in them that for clearing grease or getting mud out your clothing or whatever else it will be. These guys have developed new products, but you don't go from selling nothing to products like Ariel or Daz or Fairy Liquid, or these are just brands that we're familiar with in the UK, that are at sort of mega volume globally. You don't just, it's not a switch that you can flick that goes from nothing to global supply. So you have to build the volume, you have to build a brand, you have to build a variant of a product, which requires relatively small volumes. And I say relatively small, still hundreds or thousands of tons a year. But the reality is they can't invest in a full-scale commercial facility that would produce 100,000 tons if their market is only for 5 or 10,000 tons and they're still testing the application. And this is where they need CMO, so contract manufacturing organizations. And the challenge that we have in industrial biotechnology is they don't exist. So CMOs don't exist. Anything like the volume and demand that is being, to meet the demand that is out there right now from industry. And it's a real challenge. There are some sort of ex-East European, ex-Soviet bloc type organizations that are available, but the latest intelligence I've got is they're full. They're completely sold out. In the US, organizations like CPI, the research and technology organizations that do some of that scale up, don't really exist. There are some private contract manufacturing organizations in the US that are completely sold out. And the challenge you have is, from an investment perspective, every IB process is quite unique. Everyone thinks of a fermenter. That's great. That's just a big steel pot. You need to mix it. You need to put a few gases in. You need to control it. That, within 2 or 3 variations, you can be quite standard. But unfortunately, what you put into the pot and what you take out of the pot is quite unique to the process or the product that you're trying to manufacture. And whilst people think about fermentation as being a fairly standard process, it is. But if you're trying to recover one of these surfactants, one of these new novel surfactants, or you're trying to recover an alternative protein, or you want to make jet fuel, that's, you can do all of that in the same fermenter. But the thing that the technology you need after the fermenter to recover the product is vastly different. Therefore, setting up as a CMO in the world of industrial biotechnology isn't straightforward, because customers will come to you with a myriad of requests for different back-end downstream, what we call downstream processing technology, and you can't accommodate them all. And you can't get the investment to build that capability in the first place unless you've got a reasonable number of supply chain contracts set up. So you need the likes of Unilever or Croda or somebody to commit to multiple year agreements, which isn't how industry has evolved over the last 5 to 10 years. So what we're really needing is a mindset shift in the way that industry looks at its supply chain, because we've all been about 5S and Kaizen and Kanban and lean manufacturing principles, where people have been de-inventorying their supply chains and they want easy in, easy out contracts and these kinds of things, which are practically impossible to have if someone has to go away and invest $50 or $100 million to create a new capability. Their investors are going to want to see a 5 or 10 year offtake agreement to underpin that production facility has some volume. And there's therefore some tension and some inertia in the system, where organizations like the big guys, the big blue chips, who want this easy in, easy out CMO capability, to change their procurement practices to underpin the investments that will be required to actually build that capability that is essential for them to shift from their current product portfolio to their future sustainable alternative renewable portfolio. So that there's a whole dynamic in industry and investment that needs to be addressed to enable, certainly in the world of industrial biotechnology, to move forward in the way that life sciences and pharma has in recent years.
Absolutely. But you know what? It seems to me, because you've been around the broader industrial biotech space for a while, though, right?
Yeah, 10, 15 years.
It's been about like 10, 15 years. I know it's almost like it's a relatively newish industry, right? Using biotechnology for industrial purposes, whether it be 15 years or so, right?
No. So this is one of the really challenging things. So a lot of industrial biotechnology industry came from, certainly the chemical sector came from biotechnology originally. So if you think butanol, N-butanol, and acetone are fundamental staple commodity chemicals that get consumed in millions of tons a year around the world. Well, they were first commercialized in 1914 using biotechnology. Then we discovered crude oil. And in crude oil, we discovered ways of playing with chemistry and fractionating crude oil and reacting the molecules that came out of crude oil, and then have spent the last sort of 50 or 60 years really perfecting that, so that you can get these products down a pipe of inches to tens of inches to maybe even feet or meters in diameter, to a plant that is all done in pipes. And it's really intensive process where you can produce hundreds of thousands of tons of material very efficiently and effectively using catalysis and reactions. And what we've done over the last sort of 10 or 15 years is realize that this is having quite an adverse impact on our climate, because of the emissions that we're having and the consequential CO2 and the energy demands and all that kind of stuff. And people are now wanting to switch back to biotechnology. Well, things like butanol and acetone used to be produced by biotechnology. They're now produced by petrochemical processes. And for the last sort of 10 or 15 years, there's been a number of companies out in the world trying to re-commercialize ABE, the butanol and ethanol fermentation. And the challenge is the economics don't stack up with what we can do with the petrol products. So the market demand is there. So the Unilevers, the AkzoNobels, the guys that use the acetone and butanol in their market today want these sustainable, renewable products in volumes that would support investments. But the challenge is the renewable, sustainable industry can't compete with the price of the petro industry. And that's the challenge, because then it comes with a price premium. So some new molecules and some new supply chains are brand new, which is the biotech you're talking about. So PET, everyone has used a PET bottle at some description at some point in time. This is what your fizzy pop comes in out of the supermarket, 500 milliliters or 2 liters or whatever it will be. There are alternatives in the marketplace now that can replace PET with material that's entirely derived from sugar or from lignin, so FDCA. I'm not even going to try and pronounce what that acronym actually stands for. I'll just get myself into real bother. I could probably write it down, but I'm certainly not going to pronounce it. Far too many syllables. But that is a really viable alternative to PET. Yeah. The challenge is there's millions of tons of PET capacity in the world. So how can you introduce an alternative to PET when it's new technology and there is a huge footprint for PET production in the world today? So the focus is on, well, PET is manufactured from half a dozen different ingredients that goes through a supply chain. How can you substitute in those various ingredients to make them more sustainable and more renewable? Or look at the recycling of PET to ensure that you can incorporate more recycled PET into the products that we consume today, in the bottles that we consume with our fizzy drinks and other things. So
what's the answer? What's the answer then?
Bit of both. The answer is it's a journey. There isn't a golden bullet. It's like sustainable aviation fuel. Here's a great example. Today, I know the last 2 years have been a bit of a blip because of COVID and travel has been restricted, but there is millions and millions of tons a year of aviation fuel consumed. And the world has got used to having strawberries in the winter or summer holidays and finding summer sun and whatever else. So there is a huge amount of people transiting and products transiting around the world via aviation. And people talk about, electric planes or hydrogen planes, hydrogen fuel planes. Well, yeah, that's fine. That technology doesn't exist today, or isn't easy to implement. Putting a battery in a plane would take more fuel to get it off the ground than the energy you could store in the battery. And the journey is actually starting to substitute the fuels that we use today with more sustainable alternatives. And this is where sustainable aviation fuel comes in. And there's 6 or 8 different pathways of producing SAF today. But recognizing that we have a journey to go on, the average plane lives for 30 or 40 years in the fleet. So there's still planes in the sky today that were built in the 70s and 80s. To be fair, there's still cars on the road today that were built in the 70s and 80s. So the turn on the fleet isn't overnight, and people support those investments. So we will have conventional combustion engine type technology in aviation for decades to come. So whilst we might be able to get an electric plane or a hydrogen fuel plane, the reality is we will still have planes that burn aviation fuel and kerosene-based fuels. So the opportunity has to be a journey of transitioning away from unsustainable activities, unsustainable fossil fuel-based aviation fuel, to more renewable, more sustainable aviation fuels built, generated from biomass and other sources. Converting sunshine into aviation fuel is a great opportunity, and it's possible. But people want a golden bullet and they expect something to be implementable today and a market to respond tomorrow. When in reality, we're looking at the next decades, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, and going on that journey as technology is substituted, and it is all a positive footing that moves us in the right direction. As long as we understand that the horizon is 20 or 30 years away, we've got to take the market on the journey. We've got to take the investors on the journey. There are billions and billions, probably trillions of pounds worth of infrastructure in sort of chemical plants and pipelines and all these kinds of things that have quite a long lifespan that have been designed and built for very specific reasons. They're not easy to change from what they do today to what you might want them to do tomorrow. And the carbon footprint associated with knocking them down and building a new one would, in many instances, far outweigh the advantages of the new product that you'd be able to produce. So what you need to do is make sure that you can use the infrastructure that's being built today and start to nudge the needle and move the needle in the right direction. And as that infrastructure sort of gets to the end of its economic life, you don't support future investment in that infrastructure, you bring in the new infrastructure. Things like energy from waste facilities. So in the 90s, we had a phenomenal, PFI thing in the UK, the government. The big thing was to give people lots of contracts, and private equity would go and build all the energy from waste facilities that we now have scattered throughout the UK, burning millions of tons of rubbish. Yeah. In the 90s, that was absolutely essential for what we needed to do in terms of our waste management and managing what was going on and moving material away from landfill and on all those right kinds of decisions. Now the focus is more on recycling. And today we burn millions of tons of material that could be recycled. Well, you can't just shut down the energy from waste facilities because of the commercial contracts that are in place and they've still got economic life and so on and so forth. But what you can start to do is start nudging the needle and moving material away from those facilities. Certainly not build new facilities, or don't build new ones that burn plastics, for example, that could be recycled. So it's about evolving the thinking and evolving the marketplace rather than expecting a magic bullet that enables a change overnight in direction. Because unfortunately, industry can't respond overnight. Finance industries can't respond overnight. And you and I as consumers don't change our position overnight. You might try something once and not like it and never buy it again. So if someone's just invested hundreds of millions to produce that consumer product and it hasn't been field tested with the consumer thoroughly to know that there's a market there, lots of people will lose their jobs when that facility shuts down. Absolutely. So it's our power as consumers as much as our power as leaders in industry. And I was listening to something a few months ago that said you need about 3% of a population to be able to start nudging a needle and make change. And society can drive a lot of this stuff, but it's making sure that there's enough members of society that actually take an interest and through their own consumer choices start to nudge that needle.
Yeah, doesn't seem like a lot, does it? 3%, but I suppose when you look at the numbers, they probably mount up. It probably is probably a high number, but no, that's really interesting. Tell me, what about just when you think about, for instance, the UK, and I've heard Boris over the last year, talk about the green economy, for instance, and about shaping or helping shape the UK in the green economy, creating more jobs and opportunities. What kind of changes have you seen, if you think to the landscape over the last few years, in terms of the interest in this space and possibly the UK's ability to recreate and develop this kind of green economy?
So again, it comes back to that question mark. So I'm from the Northeast. I've lived and worked around the world, filled passports with visas going to India and China, and lived in the US for a few years and some other bits and pieces. And in the 90s, I was fortunate enough to join an organization called ICI. And I've got a career of two halves, one in the blue chip chemical industry, one in the sort of SME, more innovation oriented technology development space. And so I cut my teeth in blue chip ICI land with lots of big, large scale manufacturing plants that are now, unfortunately, primarily slabs of concrete and slowly being overgrown with weeds. The challenge we have isn't recreating the supply chains of old, trying to compete with people who are doing the job and providing material very efficiently and effectively from overseas where we import materials. But it's looking at the new supply chains that are being formed, such as alternative proteins, and how we can shift the needle in the food system and the food industry. Or if you look at electric vehicles and the batteries and the technology that's been required for moving to electrification of fleets. The new technologies and the new supply chains are where the UK has excellence in science from academia, but has lacked in the past the ability to take that excellence in science through to commercialization. And quite often it's that, as you mentioned, that valley of death. And I think what Boris has been referencing and referring to is our ability to leverage our innovation for commercialization. So that's things like the high value manufacturing catapult center that's linked between aerospace and the automotive industry, the nuclear industry, and the process chemical sector. And CPI is part of the HVMC, focusing in the process chemicals, but connecting those supply chains, because there's actually no point evolving battery technology unless you've got an automotive industry that want to use it. The chemical industry supports the production of the battery technology by producing the materials that get used in the battery, whether it's the composite materials for the battery wall and the framing, or it's the electrolytes that would sit inside, or the anode and cathode that would be in there, the different materials. So it's about looking at these new technologies and creating the new supply chains where UK is leveraging its position of scientific excellence and starts to recreate the manufacturing jobs that we used to have in other industries, but aligning those new jobs to new supply chains where the UK can service the world. And that, to me, is part of my passion. It's recreating those manufacturing jobs, but not in the old supply chains, in the new supply chains where we have world-leading science and world-leading engineering.
Excellent. And is are the courses there? Is the talent there to be able to kind of develop and bring into the industry? And
there's always lots of programs about. And if I look in the Northeast right now, there's a huge bun fight going on in the life science sector. It sounds horrific between the organisations. So we have a bit of a north-south divide. Certainly from a life sciences perspective, the Golden Triangle's favoured. Whilst I'm an advocate of the Northeast, as most people will be able to tell by my accent, we also have some of the best kept secrets up here in terms of countryside, shore, ratio of discretionary, spend on a monthly basis versus what you pay for your mortgage and your cost of living. Getting the right talent in the right place in the UK is part of the challenge. Because being London centric, you aren't going to go and build big manufacturing facilities in London. It's too expensive. That's much more your fintech or your IT kind of background type things. If you want to do deep tech innovation and deep tech manufacturing, then there are centres in the northwest, there's centres in the northeast, in Scotland, some manufacturing hubs in South Wales, all ripe for development. Humberside, maybe on the south coast in Southampton. There are places in the UK where we have still clusters of the right skill sets. You have very supportive local authorities who have interesting investment programs that they can use to support local investment or inward investment from outside the region to attract jobs. So it's really interesting, the opportunities that we have, but it's about picking the right supply chains and ensuring that in a free market economy, that we choose where we're going to invest any kind of public support. And it's not just cash that I talk about when I say public support. There's all sort of other incentives that can happen that then create the right jobs in the right areas. But if I look at the Northeast, we have a massively advantaged apprenticeship program where we're continuously recruiting and teaching the kids that coming out of university, attracting the kids coming out of schools and putting them through technical programs and apprenticeships in, things like being mechanical fitters, instrument artificers, electricians, or whatever else it will be, as well as process operators, because that's what's required. Because if you haven't got those guys, you can have the best science in the world, but they're the manufacturing jobs that actually make the things work, that make the products and get it out into the marketplace. But yeah, I mean, what we've done with the apprenticeship levy to stimulate that kind of thing in the UK has been phenomenal. First use of the word this year. So it's been really good in terms of getting those career paths started. And again, I'm biased because I'm based in the Northeast, but certainly the work that the guys like Ben Houchin has done to attract investment in the Northeast really gives me optimism, because I've got 4 kids. They're all teenagers. And I started my career when ICI was a big thing on Teesside, and it employed tens of thousands of people, and it was a natural kind of move for me. But I really see that there is an industrial future for us now in the UK with sustainable as an underpinning theme. Renewability is an underpinning theme. Looking at like the wind farms and the investments that we're making in generation of renewable power as being one of the underpinning differentiators that we will have in the UK to attract investment, to give us an advantaged economic position that will enable us to supply products and technologies to the balance of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like we're just at the beginning of the journey, right? So, I think the next 10 years, it really feels like there's an excellent opportunity in this arena to really make a difference.
One of the biggest challenges, and again, this is where organizations like CPI have focused on developing the tools and techniques, is you talk about industrial biotechnology. Historically, the journey to get from low TRL to high TRL in IB is 12 to 15 years. And that's a challenge with a lot of deep tech type innovation. It's the patience and investment required to get from low TRL to high TRL. Well, with the advances in digital technology, the ability to do in silico modeling and predictive modeling and using AI alongside the laboratory-based work and the laboratory-based advancements, we've been able to take and leverage different technologies and investments from the UK government on the infrastructure that's been installed to kind of bring that journey down to kind of 5 to 7 years, which doesn't sound a lot. I mean, it's still horrific in terms of, it's a long period of time, but relative to 12 to 15 years, it's transformational in the ability to get from, I've got an idea and it's in a test tube, we're exploring synthetic biology routes, to being able to produce kilograms of material or tons of material that could then be sampled into a market to enable you to go raise investment to build a commercial facility. That is transformational in the opportunities that it offers industry. And that's where the companies like CPI have been focused in developing those skills and tools and building our external network to help us plug the gaps so customers can come and do that kind of rapid journey for their technology. So it is very much a focused innovation for commercialization rather than an exploratory journey that takes pretty much a career.
Absolutely. I mean, look, exciting times ahead. And Kris, listen, super appreciate you coming on the show today. And we could talk for hours about this, but it's been great to have you on as a guest. I've really enjoyed the chat. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, you're welcome. Really enjoyed it, Sam. Thank you.
Pleasure.